We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph Mesechet Yevamos. This is Yevamos Daf 116a. On the previous summit, there was a machlokas Abaye and Rava. Let's say we find out that a person with a particular name died. Are we concerned that there might be somebody else with the same name? So Abaye said he was concerned, and Rava says he is not concerned. And the Gemara tries to bring a proof from a case of a shtar chov. You have a situation of a shtar chov in mechuzah, and it's got a very common name. We find that name everywhere, and apparently it was permitted to collect with that shtar chov. And so therefore Rava says it's a proof to his position, because Rava says, you see over here, there was no concern. And so now Abaye responds, in that case, Lamai Nechoshla, what exactly is the concern over there by the shtar chov? Elin Nafila, if you're worried about the fact that, let's say, maybe the person, the real owner, dropped the shtar chov, and then somebody else with the same name picked it up. Mizhar Zoyerbe, if a person realizes there are other people around with the same name, of course he's going to be careful with that shtar chov. And Ila Pikadon, and if you're worried, let's say that one person gave it to another person with the same name as a Pikadon for that person to watch, it's not really his shtar chov. But again, Kevan de Shmei Kishmei, since his name is like his name, meaning if they both have the same name, Lo Mafkid Gabe, he's not going to deposit it by somebody with the same name as him. So my Amrit, so therefore what are you going to say? What are you left with as a concern? Dilma Masar lay, that maybe he actually gave it over to him. In other words, maybe one person who had the same name as somebody else, he gave it to that person with the same name and said, you can collect with it. But that wouldn't be a problem at all, because Osios Niknos b'Mesira. The truth of the matter is, if you have letters, meaning if you have a shtar that's given over from one person to another, that is an effective kinyan, and there's nothing wrong with the other person collecting with that shtar. Rashi over here says, Dilma Masar lay nasnu lo velo kanu miyadu bekinyan. Maybe he gave it to him, and Rashi understands it to mean, and he didn't make any other kinyan. B'shama yachzor, maybe the person, he retracted, he gave it to him, but then he changed his mind. So there's no concern for that. The osios kagon shtar, when you have letters, meaning like a shtar, niknos b'mesira below kinyan, even without any other kinyan, just the mesira alone creates a kinyan, and there's no ability to retract in such a situation. And the Gemara continues, Hahu Gita de Shtakach Besura, there was a get that was found in Surah, Uchsib Behachi, and it said the following in the get, Besura Masa in the city of Surah, Ano Anan Barchia, I Anon Barchia Nahardoi of Nahardoi, Patris Vesarchis, Plonis Sintasi, I am divorcing, I am letting go, the Plonis, my wife. And so the Gemara says, Uvadku Rabbanon Misura Vad Nahardoi. So the Rabbanon, they checked from Surah all the way until Nahardoi. Below Havi Anon Barchia Achrina, there was no other person named Anan Barchia. Levar me Anon Barchia Mechigra, except for one individual named Anan Barchia Mechigra. To have it ben Nahardoi, and he happened to be in Nahardoi. And again, it seems that this get was written in Surah, so it didn't seem to be him. It seemed to be clear who the get belonged to. V'yasu Sadi, and witnesses came v'amar, and they even said, Dahu Yoma, that day, Ki Ichtav Ahu Gita, that get was written, Anon Barchia Mechigra Gabon Havi, that Anon Barchia Mechigra was actually with us. In other words, he was with us in Nahardoi. He wasn't over there in Surah. And so therefore, it should be no problem identifying the proper Anon Barchia. And so the Gemara continues, Amar Abaye says, even according to me, Da'amina Chayshinan, who I say in general, we are concerned there might be someone else with the same name. Hachalo Chayshinan, here there is no concern. Amri Sahadi, Nahardoi Havi, because the witnesses say that this other one was in Nahardoi, he wasn't in Surah, so it's no problem whatsoever. Ma'ibah B'Surah, what's he doing in Surah if he's really in Nahardoi? Amar Rav, and Rav says the opposite. Afla didida lo chayshinan, even according to me, that I'm generally not concerned that there's another person with the same name. Hacha chayshinan, here there actually is a concern. Dilma begamla parchasel, maybe he went with a flying camel, he maybe was able to travel from one place to the other very quickly. Inami bekvitza, or he used kvitza. Rashi says that kvitza means to say, bekvitza al yedei shem, he used the shem Hashem, and that shortened the path. Rashi over here says, Gamla parcha hoel maher kaof poreach. It means that the camel is so fast, like a bird that is flying. Inami, or the Gemara says, Mili Masar, maybe he gave over instructions to someone else. Kedamar lu Rav Lasafri, like Rav used to say to the scribes, V'chein Amar lu Rav Huna Lasafri, and similarly Rav Huna said to the scribes, Ki yisnechu b'shili, if you are in Shili, Ksovu b'shili, you should write that it was written in Shili. Afagav de Mimser and Mili b'hini, even though the instructions were given to you in Hini. And if you're in Hini, Ksovu b'hini, you should write that it was in Hini. Afagav de Mimser and Mili b'shili, even though the instructions might have been given in Shili. So in any case, you have a number of possibilities where this might actually be the other individual by the name of Anan Barchia, and there are various reasons as to why he might have been in Nahardoi according to the witnesses, even though this is really his get. And the Gemara continues, "My hava alayu de shumshami." So, what is the conclusion by the case of the sesame? Again, on the previous Amud, there was a situation where a person said that he had deposited his sesame by somebody else. He said he wanted them back, and that person said, "No, the sesame I already returned to you, and this is other sesame. It happens to be the exact same amount, but this really belongs to a different individual." So, the question is, do we say that we can assume that the person actually replaced the shumshami and these shumshami belong to somebody else, or not? And so the Gemara says, Rav Yemar says, "Lo chashina." We have no such concern. We assume it's the same shumshami, and he should return it to this individual. Ravina says, "No chashina." We do have a concern. We have a concern, in other words, that really that shumshami of this individual was already returned, and it was replaced with something else. And that is indeed the halacha, that we are concerned that this is not the identical shumshami, and therefore the person does not have to return them to this person who claims them. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "Kitata beino leveina v'chulu." It said if there are arguments between the husband and the wife, so then the wife is not believed to say that the husband died. And so the Gemara says, "Hechi dami kitata beino leveina." So what exactly is the situation? When can we establish that there's a quarrel between him and her? And the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Yudah, Amar Shmuel. Rav Yudah says in the name of Shmuel, "Bo meres levala gersheni." Let's say she says to her husband, "I want you to divorce me." That's a proof that they're fighting. The Gemara says that's no proof. Kulu nami amru hachi. All women will say that when they're in the middle of a fight. That doesn't prove that there's a sustained quarrel going on between them. Rather, the case is when she says to her husband, "You did divorce me." In such a situation, it's clear that they're fighting. But the Gemara says that can't be the case either. But according to that, she should actually be believed and she should be considered a divorcee. And that comes from the statement of Rav Huna. Because Rav Hamnuna said, if a woman says to her husband, "You divorced me," she is believed. Because there's a presumption. No woman is going to be so bold in front of her husband to claim that he divorced her when that's not true. Now, if that's the case, we should believe her that she's actually divorced, and so then there's no need over here anyway for her testimony that the husband died. And so the Gemara says, "Bo'omeres gerashtani b'fnei ploni uploni." So the case where we know that they're fighting is she says to her husband, "You divorced me in front of so-and-so." And we ask so-and-so, we ask the witnesses, and they say it never happened. So obviously in such a case, we cannot consider her a divorcee, but on the other hand, it is clear that they're fighting. And the Gemara says, "My time with the Ketata." What's the reason when they're fighting that we don't believe her when she says that her husband died? Rav Chanina Amar Mishum de Meshakar. Rav Chanina says it's because she's willing to lie in such a situation. Rav Shimi bar Ashi Amar Mishum de Amra b'dedami. Rav Shimi bar Ashi says no, it's because in such a case she's going to say what she imagines might have happened, even though it didn't happen. If she's already fighting with him, so even if she doesn't really know that he died, she's going to imagine that that is true. She's going to assume that he died. And the Gemara says, "My beinayu." What's the difference between these two approaches? And we'll take a look at Rashi over here. Rashi says, "The Meshakar." The first opinion is she would lie in such a situation. Merov sinna, because she hates him so much. Miskavenes lesor atzma olav. She actually wants to answer herself to him, and therefore we don't believe her that he died. And the other opinion is the amra b'dedami, that she's going to say something she assumes without checking into it. Kol makom sakona sharoasa. Anytime she sees any situation of danger that her husband was in, she's not thinking to herself, "Oh, maybe he didn't die." V'lo, and I'll say, "I'm not going to remarry." The hoel v'sanyale, because since she hates him, lo daika kuliyai, she's not so careful, and that's why she'll just assume that he died. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yomi Gemara Amud Beis.